Welcome back. Let's now take a look at a second business requirement. Let's assume that the NYC Taxi and Limousine Commission wants to identify the demand for taxi in different boroughs and days so that they can cater for the demand by supplying more licenses as required. Let's go through the specific requirements here. Firstly, they want to know the demand based on the borough. They also want to know the demand based on the day of the week or whether it's a weekend. The company also wants to know whether customers are using the dispatch service or getting the taxi street hail. Apart from these requirements, the company also wants to know the total distance covered, the trip duration total, fare amount taken. And they all should be broken down by date and borough. So effectively a lot of the data is clip date, and below the non-functional requirements remain the same as the previous requirement. But I want to emphasize the last point here. We want to minimize the number of aggregated tables created. So we want to look at whether we can get these measures into the same table that we created earlier. Let's do that now. As we've seen, all of the measures requested are the same granularity as the first requirement. That is, we need to do the calculations per trip, date, and borough. So we can include these measures into the existing dataset. And that's what we'll do. Now let's identify the columns that are required in our table. We need borough for the first requirement. The second requirement will require trip date, trip day, and the trip day weekend indicator. The third requirement here will require two counts, one for the dispatch trip type and the other one for the street hail. And the final requirement will need the total trip distance, duration, and the total fare amount. These are the columns we need, but we already have the columns borough, trip date, trip day, and the trip day weekend indicator in our aggregated table. So we just need to introduce the other things, which are the dispatch trip count, state hail trip count, trip distance, trip duration, total fare amount. In order to identify whether the trip is street, hail, or dispatch, we also need to join the trip type table. With that, I've given all the information that's required to build a solution for this requirement. As you are already familiar with these concepts, please take it as an assignment and update the stored procedure and the view to accommodate this requirement. Good luck with your assignment, but if you get stuck, please come back to the video and I'll take you through my solution. Welcome back. Hope you managed to complete the assignment successfully. If not, please follow along with me. We'll start with the stored procedure. Let me open up this procedure. And the changes I made here are quite simple. The first thing is I've joined the data to the trip type table in Silver Layer using the trip type from our trip data. So this is so that we can get the trip description. So based on that, what I have done is similar to what we did for the credit card and the cash transactions. I have checked for the type description to be street hail or dispatch, and I've done the counts. So we've got the street hail trip count and the dispatch tip count and the other three columns. We want some of the trip distance. So that is from the trip data itself. Trip data has got the trip distance. So we can just do a sum of the trip distance to get the total trip stands for the day. So the next item we wanted is the trip duration. So there is field called trip duration in our trip data. But we can calculate that because we've got the pickup date time and the drop-off date time. These two are date time field rather than date fields. So we can just get the difference between the two dates in order to get the trip duration. I've calculated that in minutes, but it's up to you. It sounded good to me. But if you wanted seconds, you can do that as well. And then I've done a sum of everything just to get the trip duration for the trip date and the borough. So that would be per day, per borough. You'll have the duration that, and then for the fare amount, we've got a separate field called fare amount. So it's just a simple sum on the fare amount to get the total fare amount. So they are all the changes in our stored procedure. Let's quickly execute that, and that's exactly executed successfully. And now let's take a look at the view. So for the view, we wanted to add the new fields. As you can see, we've added the new fields, which are the street hail trip, current dispatch trip, tip, current trip, distance, trip, duration, and the fare amount. So I just add those 5 fields here. The only thing you may notice is that the distance and the fat amount are having decimal places, so I've defined them as floats. There is no other changes, so I'm going to just quickly execute that as well. So let's start by executing this stored procedure. As you know, we've got the create gold trip data green file with the execute statements. Before we execute the script, let's go to our data hub and delete the data which is already there because we're going to override that data now. So let me go to my container and I'm going to go to the gold folder and I'm going to delete the trip data green folder here. So that's been deleted and we will be able to write the data into that now. So let me go to the script here and execute all of the months. So it's going to just run the entire script and we should populate all of our data into the folder. So the query has now successfully executed for all of these exact statements, and we should see the data in our container. So let me go over there. And if I do refresh, I see the trip data green folder and we've got the year and we've got the month underneath and we would have the Parquet files as well. So we got the data in our data lake now. So let's go to the views and we'll just recreate the view and run the select statement. And the view is really in the data we've just returned. So let's run this and that should bring back the data we need. So let's have a look at that. And we've got the year and the month, which are the partition columns, and then we've got the rest of the data as well. And the new columns are at the end, which are the street hail trip, count, dispatch trip, count. And then the trip distance, duration, and the fare amount. So everything looks good to me. With this, we've now successfully implemented a solution to produce the aggregated data required to satisfy both of our requirements. So the BI reports or the analyst can now query this view to get the data they needed and build the dashboards they want to build. That's the end of this session. I'll see you in the next one.